Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to all of you. It's both a privilege and a pleasure to moderate this discussion. And I would just to start with a very brief introduction, because since last autumn, I think Poland has once again embraced the role what it had since the early 1980s. A role marked by its steadfast resistance to authoritarianism, and actually also its leadership in democratic transformation, which that time led to 1989, actually not only for Poland, but to all Central European nations. And now Poland once again is a lighthouse of democratic aspirations in our region. Since last October, our Polish friends and allies have embarked on a historic re-democratization journey, the likes of which Europe has not seen for decades. This ambitious endeavor seeks to extricate Poland's political and constitutional system, particularly its judiciary and media, from the grip of illiberal state capture. The goal is nothing less than to restore a fully functioning pluralist democracy and re-establish liberal constitutionalism, actually, and we will discuss that, I think, in detail, in full compliance with the rule of law. I would argue that no endeavor is more significant today in Europe, and no lesson learned more invaluable, especially for an audience of Hungarian Democrats. Hungary and Poland have been both at the forefront of the tragic wave of autocratization within the European Union. Yet, as we can see, the hope remains strong that countries can chart a course to escape this legacy, and Poland is definitely leading that way. Despite the differences in our constitutional and political systems, we are optimistic, we Hungarian Democrats, that Poland will offer a sort of blueprint how to overcome these challenges of illiberal state capture. So with that context in mind, I am truly honored to welcome our distinguished speakers who will guide us today through this discussion. Thank you all for accepting our invitation. And I would like to start addressing my first question to Deputy Minister Mazur. Reflecting on the past almost 1 year since the election, what are the main achievements of the Polish ruling coalition in restoring judicial independence and liberal constitutionalism? And what are the institutional and legislative challenges that hinder actually that process? So thank you so much, and you have the floor, Deputy Minister Mazur.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. It's a great honor to represent Polish Ministry of Justice during this splendid conference. I will start from main challenges, main obstacles for development of the restoration of rule of law. As you know, in October 2023, a coalition of pro-democratic parties led by former Polish Prime Minister and former President of the Council of Europe, Donald Tusk, won the elections in Polish Parliament, leaving the right-wing nationalist coalition led by Jarosław Kaczyński beaten. In theory, the change of parliamentary majority and the change of government to a pro-democratic one that has happened should make it possible to quickly restore the rule of law in Poland, at least in political terms. Unfortunately, reality is a little bit different. Reversing the negative regulatory changes adopted in the period of the last 8 years and introducing laws to restore the independence of the key institutions responsible for protection of the rule of law will require the adoption of a series of laws by the Parliament of the new term. This may prove to be very difficult for 2 reasons. First, the President of Poland until 2025 is Andrzej Duda, who is a former member of Law and Justice Party and who shows far-reaching loyalty to former ruling coalition. Although the Polish state system in the Polish state system, the president has mainly honorary and representative powers, he has also prerogative to veto a bill presented by parliament. While this veto can be rejected by the lower house of parliament, the same a 3/5 majority is required to do so. In spite of the fact that the coalition of pro-democracy parties has a clear majority in the current parliament, it is not enough to override a presidential veto. Secondly, the Polish president also has the right to send bills back for constitutional scrutiny to the Constitutional Court, which was elected in violation of the Constitution and has repeatedly shown absolute loyalty to Kaczyński's party. So it will easily be able to obstruct the work of parliament, whether by falsely declaring laws unconstitutional or by placing them in the freezer. Of course, it doesn't mean that we are not doing anything and we are waiting for the change in the seat, in the position of the president. We conduct as many factual activities as we can on the basis of currently existing provisions of law. One of such important activities is replacement of the court presidents. I will remind you that between 2017 and 2018, there was a purge conducted among presidents and vice presidents of Polish courts. They were revoked via fax messages without giving any reasons. What was even more, their successors were often appointed according to the key of political loyalty, and such newly appointed presidents of courts applied soft administrative measures of repression against the defiant judges. Currently, the new Minister of Justice, mainly taking into account the group motions of judges, undertook a number of proceedings aimed at dismissing presidents appointed previously without participation of the judicial self-government. These procedures are initiated on the basis of current rules in a two-tier procedure, the first stage of which takes place before the college of the court, before which the requested person has the right to be heard. In the case of positive opinion of the court college, the Ministry of Justice doesn't initiate the next stage of the proceedings before the National Council of the Judiciary, which the minister doesn't recognize due to its defectiveness. What is more, despite the lack of basis in the current regulations, the appointment of successors to dismissed presidents takes place taking into account candidates proposed by the judicial self-government, namely by assemblies of judges. Such a solution is based on the standards of the Council of Europe, among others, opinion of the Venice Commission from 2017. Up to date, more than 100 presidents and vice presidents of courts were dismissed under the described procedure, and more than 40 resigned themselves. What we also did was the appointment of so-called ad hoc disciplinary commissioners on the basis of the applicable regulations. They are appointed in order to verify the correctness of politically motivated disciplinary proceedings instigated against judges within recent few years. So far, they have taken over disciplinary proceedings against more than 40 judges, which were initiated during the term of office of the previous Minister of Justice. In this way, we successfully erased the chilling effect among judges, which was caused by these ungrounded disciplinary proceedings. Another factual action which we did was the recommendation of the Minister of Justice sent to the presidents of courts of appeal to remove judges' declarations of membership in association from the official website of the courts. and limit the processing of statements to their storage. And it was in line with the judgment of the Court of Justice of the European Union of 5th June 2023. Our main activity currently is preparing the draft laws which are going to be adopted after the change in the position of the president. One change of law was introduced even before. It was change of the internal rules of procedure of ordinary courts. This is a legislative act of lower level, which is issued by the Minister of Justice without participation of the President. And this act have been amended so that cases for disqualification of a judge due to the circumstances of his/her appointment are not assigned for examination to those judges who were promoted by the defective National Council of the Judiciary. We have also already prepared a draft law on the National Council of the Judiciary, providing for the election of judges, members of NCJ by other judges in universal and transparent elections supervised by the National Electoral Commission. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, this project was referred by President Duda to the politicized and partly improperly staffed Constitutional Tribunal for Preventive Control. We also prepared the draft law on the Constitutional Tribunal, introducing guarantees of the political independence of the tribunal, among others through the introduction of qualified 3/5 majority in the election of judges of the tribunal by the lower chamber of parliament, or by introduction of temporary 5-year ban on politicians holding certain positions from taking over positions of judges of the tribunal. Unfortunately, we expect that it will also be sent by the president for preventive control to the politicized Constitutional Tribunal. We also have prepared a spot amendment to the Act on the System of Ordinary Courts with regard to the delegation of judges to other courts by the Minister of Justice, which is aimed at increasing the transparency of ministers' activities in this area. And this amendment is intended to implement the Court of Justice of the European Union ruling of 2021. We have also prepared the draft law, which we called Anti-Mazur Act, which aim is, among others, to remove from the law on the organization of ordinary courts the provisions introduced therein by the Mazur Act, including new types of disciplinary offenses allowing judges to be punished for implementing the decisions of international tribunals or questioning the legal status of neo-judges. So these kinds of torts under this draft law are going to be removed from the Act on Organization of Ordinary Courts. We also have prepared or are preparing currently a broader amendment to the law on the system of ordinary courts, which is aiming to reactivation of the judicial self-government, which was completely degraded or even killed by the Mazur Act. We have also finished preparation of the bill on the separation of the functions of the Prosecutor General and the Minister of Justice, which is aimed at depoliticizing the prosecutor's office. And the draft law in this respect have been already prepared and is currently under examination by the Venice Commission. We have also prepared a draft law on the restoration of constitutional order in the judiciary, which is intended to heal the legal status of defectively appointed judges, as well as to enable disciplinary proceedings to be carried out against those of them who have violated in qualified way the principles of judicial ethics by taking an active part in the process of political subordination of the judiciary. And these are our main achievements and main obstacles in a very nutshell. Thank you very much. for giving me the floor.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister Mazur, for this very insightful introduction and also the timely reminder from a Hungarian perspective that if institutions of checks and balances are captured by illiberal stakeholders, then they are designed actually to hamper and obstruct democratic processes and legitimate democratic governance should a change happen. And if they are designed for that purpose, we potentially shouldn't have the illusions that they will act in a different way. So thank you so much again. And I would turn to Barbara, because you have been studying attacks on the rule of law in the EU and in Poland for over a decade now. And during this time, I think it was always a crucial part of the academic but also policy discussions that a restoration of the rule of law should actually happen in compliance with the rule of law. And what we have seen over the past almost a year, that the Polish government is criticized for various reasons from various corners of the legal community, watchdogs, and also the Polish society for two reasons. Once, that it's not necessarily living up to its maxim, restoring the rule of law in accordance with the rule of law, or the opposite, that it's not doing enough to restore liberal constitutionalism because the goal has a primacy over the means. It's not doing enough to purge neo-judges with questionable integrity. And with all your experience in the topic, I would be just very much intrigued to learn how do you see actually these contradictions? How would you draw the balance of the Polish governing coalition in that regard? Over to you.
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation and for this super difficult question. A couple of months ago here in this room, Adam Bodnar, so the Minister of Justice, was discussing exactly the same topic. What are his plans, how to rebuild, how to reestablish rule of law principles? He was discussing all those, hard law issues that Minister Mazur just presented, but he was also trying to mention some soft elements, like, the sense of transparency, something that we are changing the standards. So that was his plan. And what's actually, it's a sign that the Minister of Justice, the executive, are kind of the running force, the headquarters of those rule of law exercise taking place now in Poland. Interestingly, the parliament is not very much involved in it. So they are basically discussing the drafts of law prepared by the executive, and I don't think they are driving force in creating those ideas. And as you could see and hear from the first speech today in this panel, there are challenges dealing with the capture institutions, and the tribunal is the biggest example of that. So the capture institution, tribunal, I think it's not really a legal challenge to deal with this problem. It's more a kind of a political one. You heard, there's a president who will probably veto any type of attempts, legislative attempts to make this body independent again, especially because it's super useful to have such a body when you are in the opposition. But I think the major legal challenges dealing with the judiciary, so the topic which was discussed for the last 8 years in very details, are exactly those so-called neo-judges. So judges who were appointed after 2018 by a captured institution, National Council of Judiciary. So it's not about the captured institution itself, but the results of their work, which seems to be the biggest legal challenge. Also in practical terms, because we're speaking about 2,500 people. It's a quarter of all judges in Poland. So you cannot just say basically, you can go home, you will be removed from the office. It's not an option because the judiciary is a living system. My problem with the last 8 years is that, in my opinion, the Minister of Justice, the executive, they don't have the story that was told to people. What are we going to do with those judges? You could hear the topic is super complicated from the legal terms, but I didn't hear any kind of narrative how we're going to deal with this particular judicial problem. And it was until like 2 weeks ago when the first proposal from the Minister of Justice was actually prepared, and presented. What do we want to do with those neo judges? But But given the fact that the Minister of Justice, they don't have, I think, this kind of narrative, this story to tell, the judicial associations, they have the ideas how to deal with the problem. And they present very radical options to be implemented. First, they use this type of moral argument. We, the judges, the good judges, we did not start it in all those competitions for the judicial positions, so we have kind of a moral right to now decide how those neo-judges should be kind of, verified, regulated, maybe even removed from the office. So this is one type of argument being used. The second type of argument deals with the international case law, with the Strasbourg court, with Luxembourg court. So basically says, we need to get rid of neo-judges from the position because Strasbourg and Luxembourg told us to do so, because they're illegal judges. They cannot decide the cases. When you look at Strasbourg case law especially, it was decided that judges in the Supreme Court, when they decide cases, then the result is a violation of Article 6 of the Convention, so right to fair trial. You cannot let people to still violate someone's right to fair trial. So this is a kind of a strong argument. But my problem with this argument is that it's being presented in a very blanket way. This case law is super difficult, and I will not discuss it now, because it's too complicated, actually, even for lawyers to see what are the red lines, what are the minimum that we have to achieve, what is doable, what is not. But there is also a third type of argument used, which is a kind of non-existence type of argument. So the argument is the National Council of Judiciary was established in a violence with the Constitution, with the violence of the EU law. So it did not exist from the very beginning because it was unconstitutional. It was illegal from the very beginning. So then basically we don't deal with the judges. They have to, they should be just, go home. They should not be judges anymore. So from this perspective, the biggest threat is that we forget about the link between the judge and the decision they make. We somehow forget that if we say there was not a judge and the result would be he or she did not make any decision. And that's basically a dead end for any judicial system. No one will be able to deal with such kind of, with such type of trouble. And I think that would be my last point. As we see, the time factor is another argument that we have to keep in mind. Some of those neo-judges were appointed in 2018, so like 6 years ago. Can you say someone 6 years later that he should be removed from, she or he should be removed from the office? What about the legal certainty? How can we perceive this argument from the perspective of a living system of judiciary? And that brings me to another time-related argument. It's not 1989, so this type of transition has to be different because the overall circumstances are different at the same time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. 1989 also happened in Hungary, actually, with a full legal continuity between the systems. So, of course, the political environment is very different. But I am not an expert of transitional justice, but we are heading to a period in Central and Eastern Europe, and I think we again will face that program of transitionary justice. And thank you also for highlighting the point, how important is it actually beyond the constitutional, legal nitty-gritties and goals to have a coherent narrative which is supporting in the public the re-democratization. And if that is missing, it can also be not only a political, but in some way partially a legal challenge for the stakeholders. Anna, you have many hats. Obviously, you are one of the most recognized Polish rule of law scholars, but you are also a media expert. And what we have seen that the media field became an early battleground after the October 2023 elections. And while on the one hand, it's unquestionable that TVP, and it will be very familiar also for a Hungarian audience how public media works. So TVP was a political propaganda mouthpiece of the Polish government. On the other hand, a very broad coalition questioned the political wisdom behind the government actions which tried to cut down in a very early stage that media activities, actually trying to declare public media bankrupt, to find a legal way how to take it over. So against that background, I would be very interesting to learn about your thoughts. How do you see, what's the state of play in the Polish media field, and whether there is a silver line to restore media pluralism in Poland actually very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in contrast with what Barbara said about plans that had been made by NGOs, by civil society already during the rule of law crisis in the judicial independence dimension, what concerns the media freedom dimension, especially what should be done with the public media, media regulators, was not really discussed in such detail to the level of presenting draft laws. So this created this lacuna that the new government wanted to fill, and of course lawyers were consulted, but it was not this open, transparent process that has been going for years, what we experienced with judicial reforms, planned judicial reforms. So maybe I will just recap a little bit what happened and what were the limitations for the current government. The previous government in 2016, similarly to what happened in Hungary, changed media regulators, appointed their loyalists to them. They took over the constitutional regulator and added a new one. And this created a system in which the public media were not accountable for the propaganda, and also that was often in breach of the law, for example, hate speech. So they were not accountable for that. Plus, the media regulators were used to limit media freedom for private media. The media capture happened in Poland to a lesser extent than in Hungary, but the media regulator was used to, for instance, similar to Hungary, prolong renewing broadcasting licenses to various media or imposing fines to them. And this created this hostile environment for private media. So the new government had this problem because the constitutional media regulator has been just appointed in 2022 for the next 6-year term, and the person who is its head, Maciej Świrski, is an ideological supporter of PIS. In the past, he was the head of an NGO who was instrumental in fighting for the good name of Poland, including through helping to file lawsuits against the researchers of the Holocaust. This man was engaged even after elections in this battle to limit media freedom. He, as the president of the national media regulator, could, for instance, impose fines, and these fines were record high. So the government decided to use, basically argue that because the previous government did not appoint the boards of public media companies in accordance with the constitution, now they should use the commercial company law provisions and change the boards. And that was this legal problem that happened because most constitutional experts, leading NGOs such as the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights, warned that you cannot use the commercial companies code to specific companies that are public broadcasters. And however, this step was applauded by many voters of the ruling coalition, and de facto it led to personal changes in the boards and later also in management. As Daniel mentioned, another legal trick was used to use the fact that the president vetoed an amendment to the budget that would provide many millions, billions of Polish zlotys for the public media. So President vetoed this money, and this allowed to put the media companies into the state of liquidation where the liquidator is governing them. So we have this bizarre situation, which is from the legal standpoint absolutely not clear, although it was devised by lawyers. And now we have the factual changes that amounted to some media propagandists resigning, others being fired from the public media, people who worked for the public media replacing them, returning, also big transfers from private commercial and non-profit media happened. And we have the situation where definitely the broadcast is more calm, balanced. It's not the BBC standard yet. And the promise was that it will be crystal clear and not biased, but definitely there is an improvement. What also happened is that, in fact, there is a bigger media pluralism because I'm not saying journalists, but media workers, propagandists from the previous public media, they joined new media enterprises. So there are two media barons of the right in Poland, and they actually achieved a great success by expanding their media operations, especially television, that is the news television. So this was first on the internet, on YouTube, but later the cable broadcasting was added, and now they also have like a regular broadcasting license. And I mean, compared to one situation 1 year ago, their programs receive a broad audience, but this is still marginal when we look at the whole broadcasting market, around less than 4% of the whole audience. But definitely, it demonstrated that people who are not only associated directly by being MEPs or members of the Law and Justice Party, but the circles that profited and supported them, such as, for example, people who have experience of producing media, they regrouped. And they are still now trying to navigate a little bit this current situation, very much supporting the previous government, PIS, and looking for perhaps new opportunities. They are considering that perhaps the presidential elections would be surprisingly lost by the current, let's say, governing coalition. And also another point that I should raise is the question of accountability. So this is a big promise that was made by Donald Tusk's government to the core voters of his party to basically make a big change in the Polish approach to transitional justice, because in the 90s we had this approach of a rather light reckoning with the communist past, and also it was a contract, an informal contract between governments in Poland, that the reckoning with what people did in the office would not be that strong. And now we had this process of trying to put the president of the media regulator before the state tribunal. This is actually possible because the current governing coalition has enough seats in parliament to do so. However, the MEPs from the PIS party have already filed a motion to the Constitutional Tribunal to verify whether the provisions that allow for that are constitutional. So I think that this would be an interesting process to observe in the next year, because at this stage we only have the motion in the committee in the parliament. So, I mean, it's of course not conclusive what happened with the Polish media. It's also a very dynamic segment, which in contrast to the judiciary has also private actors. But I feel that this process demonstrates that early actions actually bring some changes. And today, when we have the massive flood in Poland, actually public broadcasters are doing a good job informing citizens.
Thank you so much, Anna. Obviously, restoring democracy is not only a question of having the right legislative design, but there is also a very fundamental prerequisite, successful mobilization that can ultimately result in the electoral victory of democratic forces. Genevieve, you have been closely watching both domestic politics and civic activism, actually both in Poland and Hungary over the past years. What would be your takeaways? What are the most important lessons learned with regard to political mobilization in Poland before and around the 2023 elections that can serve as a kind of blueprint for a Hungarian audience? Over to you.
Thank you. So I arrived in Hungary 2 years ago as part of an initiative to support civil society organizations in both countries to link with peers who are interested in the same interests and do exactly this, of share what's working, develop advocacy strategies, look at pre-election cycles and try and make change. And so for all of us watching Poland from Hungary, this election was really exciting. And I think in particular just to see such a highly mobilized and engaged electorate. And we saw that not just in turnout, but really in the large public coordinated civic activity we saw. We saw it in the widespread countrywide campaigning of candidates. And then I think really significantly just the access that citizens had to candidates in this period. It was remarkable to see people campaigning at tram stops and in the streets and really just making this effort to engage and reach out. At the same time, I don't think the election was that different than a lot of the really ugly politics we've seen in this region. It was polarizing, it was confrontational. We spoke about the issues of media capture, that the state broadcast was just fully in support of law and justice, and so it was not an easy competition by any means. There's also lots of discrepancies in spending. If you look at digital advertising, for example, Law and Justice spent more than any other party combined. And so against that backdrop, what can we glean? What was the reason for Tusk and the parties now in coalition for their success? And really just comes down to this direct voter engagement. So how do you make voter engagement a winning strategy? I think my two main takeaways from Poland is that you need to start early. It takes a long time. You need to be everywhere. And in order to be everywhere, you really need to make civil society your volunteer army. And so drawing from that, I think, again, seeing these public coordinated efforts were really part of the success. The only thing I really want to highlight as well is just the role of women in this election. In the weeks before the election, the majority of undecided voters were women. And of women under 45, about half of those women said they didn't even plan to participate in the election. So even in just the weeks leading up to the election, there was a huge constituency that was largely untapped. While women, if you look at a single party, Law and Justice did get the most vote share among women, but of women who had not participated in the previous elections, 85% of them voted for the parties that are now in government. And so by tapping into this sort of 50% of undecided voters, a huge number of people were mobilized to participate, and women actually showed up to vote in larger numbers than men. And I think it's wonderful if you see sort of how campaign lists were formulated, that there were so many women candidates, and as sort of a stark contrast to what we've seen in Hungary. And so I think just to draw a lesson there for Hungary, that women's issues in this country are mobilizing issues. We've seen it in the teachers' protests and other activity, that these are core to what women care about. We have civic groups here who are presenting an alternative version of what women's empowerment should look like in Hungary. And we have men and women in this country who believe in an alternative policy to the sort of family-centric position that the government has taken. So that is just a ripe group for any parties to just tap into and propose a platform that I think would be really resonant.
Thank you, thank you so much for this excellent summary. I fully subscribe to your last point, that despite the existing differences, especially in the crucial mobilization points for Polish women, which was the really draconian abortion legislation in the country, there are also issues in Hungary through which you can mobilize that part of the electorate, and so there is some hope and silver lining on the horizon. We started late, and I'm also aware of the time. I can't see that. I have very bad eyes. But I would like to give the opportunity also for the participants to ask questions, and would open the floor for a Q&A round, please just raise your hand and my colleagues will bring the micros to you. The gentleman there. Please introduce yourself briefly.
Hello, I'm Zoltán Zarandi, or Zarandi Zoltán, from Hungary. I'm working for a network of independent media outlets in Hungary, especially for ketchup, which has nothing to do with tomatoes, but Kecskemét in the Wild East. What you told us is very inspiring. It reminds me of the first line of your national hymn, Polska jeszcze nie umarła. Poland is not yet lost until we live. I would, it reminds me of 1989, of course. I belong to that generation. I had the opportunity to meet the world-famous electrician from Dansk, who almost single-handedly set up a movement for 20 million people to make democracy again viable and a blueprint not just for Hungary but for the civilized world. It's always in history, the Polish lesson is that it is possible to make eggs from scrambled eggs. It's other way around, it's pretty easy. So without democrats, without citizens, it is still possible to make democracy against all odds. It's also possible to make capitalism without capital. It is a blueprint for Hungary as well. Let me just ask you a few questions or just raise a few possible questions for future debates. How do you envisage, including Deputy Minister, how do you envisage this re-democratization experiment sustainable? How do you re-educate the citizens? Because revolutions, as Gergő Karácsony just said, happens in our minds first. And so you need a new mindset. It's an educational exercise, a lifelong educational exercise, to convince even your adversaries in the peace party and also in the legislative courts. How do you convince them and their kids and their grandchildren to make democracy viable again? I also have another question on the blueprint for Hungary, that kind of after the hyphen. I would be very interested in your experience in the engagement of the Hungarian stakeholders, politicians, media people, journalists, students, businessmen. Are they interested in the Polish re-democratization experiment? Were they engaged in regaining democracy in Poland? And if not, and I'm afraid there is a very limited kind of engagement at the moment, how do you think the chances for a bilateral blueprint re-democratization engagement or partnership? And I would also make a just very short recommendation for this brilliant, venue and also the institution and this initiative, the Budapest Forum. It would be a magnificent idea to contemplate a follow-up bilateral Polish-Hungarian conference, workshop on re-democratization 2.0, where Hungary could be preparing for 2026, learning from your lessons from 2023. Thank you.
Thank you so much for these excellent points. Are there any further questions in the room? If not, I would add one last and provocative one, and then we can just make a closing round. As it was referred to several times in our conversation today, especially actually the success of the reform legislation is mainly dependent on one political development, and that's actually the change of the president position next spring. And I know that it's in some way a pessimistic and very provocative question, but what's the plan B? I know that all of the chances are pointing in the direction that there will be a change, and a candidate of one of either the coalition or one of the coalition parties might win this election. But these are elections and will be democratic elections. So what's if that will not happen? What if PIS will be able to hold its grip on the presidential position? What potential scenarios do you see in that case to achieve some democratic changes until 2027 and the next parliamentary election? How can Polish Democrats actually guarantee that there won't be lost 4 years for Poland? So we can just go around and feel free to pick questions. The first question was how we can make the Polish re-democratization experiment sustainable, and whether there is a focus on working on democratic education and democratic attitudes. The second question was the role of Hungarian stakeholders in this experiment, and whether there can be a bilateral working group on democratic options. And the third one was my very negative and provocative question as closing. And I don't know, would like to anyone answer immediately, or shall we go around? Deputy Minister Mazur, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I fully agree with Mr. who asked the question about the education. Some time ago, we faced the slogan, economy, you stupid, and in terms of reinforcing of the democratic systems against the autocratic tendencies, the slogan, education, you stupid, is of utmost importance. During this rule of law crisis in Poland, Polish associations of judges put a lot of enormous effort in terms of engagement of judges in the education of the young people. So Polish Association of Judges are active during the rock festivals. They conduct lessons about the independence of the judiciary in school. And we, as the Ministry of Justice, will support not only associations of judges, but all NGOs, pro-governmental NGOs, in terms of arranging of such instruments. We want also engage Polish scouts in the process of education of young people, because this is quite a numerous group. And we also want to educate Polish judges as well in terms of international standards deriving from the case law of European Court of Human Rights or Court of Justice of European Union, in order to provide them with instruments which are applicable during fight against autocratic tendencies. In terms of question of the moderator, what can happen if the next Polish president wouldn't be pro-democratic, we can say it generally, call it generally. Unfortunately, the answer is not optimistic. Such situation would probably prolong the crisis of the rule of law in Poland, because in terms of making a real progress in terms of new laws which have to be adopted in order to improve the quality of public life and the independence of the judiciary, we will have probably until the change of the composition of the Constitutional Court, which will last for another, I think, about 2 years. So in such case, the prognosis is not optimistic. Thank you very much.
So much, Mr. Mazur. I think we can just go in reverse order. Feel free to pick one or more questions, address them, and we can start with Genevieve.
Sure. Maybe I'll speak to the question on whether Hungarian stakeholders were watching the Polish elections and ready to adopt the lessons learned. They were absolutely watching. I mean, I know at NDI, not just our civic partners, but political stakeholders at all levels came to us immediately following the elections with those specific requests. Please connect us. We want to learn. The question is whether they're ready to apply the lessons learned from the Polish elections. I think even if you just look at our most recent election cycle, the takeaways of early campaigning outside of Budapest or outside of the capital city were not necessarily applied. And more remarkably, where we do see the prioritization of direct voter contact, a move away from just digital and online engagement has been successful. And so absolutely Poland should be looked to and modeled here.
Thank you. So I will answer the question about the cooperation. So I believe that cooperation is really important also because, to be honest, when we hear optimistic takes on what's happening in Poland, when we are in Budapest, it's very refreshing because in Poland everyone is a bit critical of the progress that is being made. So also this is a motivation that we can have from our Hungarian colleagues, counterparts. So a big takeaway should be that, the preparations should be made in advance and that the work should be divided because, of course, our constitutional problems, very specific legal problems are different because our systems are different. So we cannot, of course, translate the Polish solutions one-to-one to Hungary, but the approach is important, and that approach means that it's better to wait for the results, having some draft bills prepared. And another takeaway would be that, brace yourself that you will also quarrel between yourselves. Let's say the pro-democratic organizations, activists, etc. Because if the election is won, then the opportunities arise, and then it's possible to finally start discussing the project's various opinions, and the debate will be again pluralistic. And that is, of course, positive, but it could be also a bit surprising for people who have been used to many, many years of fighting against, let's say, the common threat.
I mean, I would say something very general, but I think it will answer your question and Zoltan. So I think the rule of law is not about law always, but it's also about politics. It's also a political idea. So if you want to have sustainable rule of law, you need to talk to the opposition. So if one day, the next presidential elections are going to be lost by the current democratic majority, they will have to talk to a new president. They should already talk to a current president in order to be sure that whatever the best legal draft they have is going to be also supported by the possible opposition. I know it's super difficult, but it has to happen if we think about the rule of law in a longer terms than just 4-year parliamentary term.
Thank you so much. Anna, Barbara, Genevieve, Mr. Mazur, thank you so much for this very insightful, but I would say also very engaging discussion. I hope that we will soon have the opportunity to discuss again the practical applicability of Polish lessons learned in the case of an already ongoing Hungarian democratization experiment. And having said that, thank you all for being with us today. Thank you.